So Nick, tell us a bit about piloting and how that comes into franchising, because it's always said that if you want to franchise your business, you've got to run a pilot operation first. So what's that about?
Yeah, so pilot model is looking at having an example, I suppose. If you're a franchisee coming in, you want a proven model. So how do you prove your model? You, as the company owner, might have had a unit that you've been running very successfully, but having a pilot, which theoretically could be done by the original business, but ideally it's a new code that is set up as a pseudo franchise. So there's probably a way we can do it in a slightly smaller agreement that I know we've done in the past. That you have a pilot which water tests all your systems. So you think you've got a great brand, you've got great systems and processes. How are we going to prove that? We're going to prove that by having a pilot which will deliver on everything you want to deliver. It allows you to say, look at things like your supply chain, your training, your branding and what demands you're making on things that people must have and mustn't have. But also, there's lots of learnings that can come from that. So rather than going 2 feet into a fully blown franchise, if you've been able to test and look at, okay, how easy is it for us to replicate what we currently do over here on the left, on the right, then a lot of that two-way feedback will help you build the fuller picture for your sort of full-blown franchise.
And so if I'm going to set up a pilot before I launch my franchise, who do I pick to be the pilot franchisee, and how long does their pilot agreement last for?
Yeah. So who you pick is a good one. So depending on what your brand is, and we've worked with many different brands, and some just naturally have people saying, I love your brand, I'd love to franchise it. And you might find a good person that's relatively close geographically to where you are, which would make good sense because you might want to be in their business quite a bit. So you might find someone who's literally been looking for setting up their business. But it might also be a development opportunity for a really key member of staff. And if you've got a great person that you think they've gone as far as they can in my business, they're probably going to leave before too long. It might be a nice way of involving them to retain that individual and that talent and knowledge, but also prove your business, and they might become part of the franchise running in the future. So it gives potential to them.
That's a good idea. And then how long do you have to run the pilot before you then think, right, I'm ready to be doing full-blown franchising?
Yeah, so you definitely need 1 calendar year, or one full year. So especially if your business has got any seasonality to it, if there's peaks and troughs for whatever reason, you definitely want to have 12 months under your belt. What it also does as well, is as the franchisor, you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to be trying to attract franchisees further down the line. If you've got that proven model, one, you can share that P&L, and you'd set that up with the guinea pig, for want of a better term. That will have an open book policy, so let's get all the learnings out of that. So you can share that information with an incoming potential franchisee, so they can understand the business and use the franchisor might be able to make some tweaks. But you have seen that through 1 full calendar cycle, so that you have an understanding of, okay, these are where the demands of the business are, the peaks and the troughs. It also will watch, as I said, your systems behind that to make sure that you're creating.
Okay.
Sorry, but you also mentioned length. The length of the agreement, I'd probably lean more on you on that. I'd probably look at a couple of years, maybe up to 5 years. Would you for a pilot agreement?
Well, I think, I don't know, you can take different approaches to it, but what I would tend to do is to say the pilot agreement is going to be short because you haven't proof tested your system, you haven't water tested it. And therefore your manual isn't complete or completely accurate, you haven't designed everything about the systems. So normally I would say if you're going to run a mini pilot agreement, you do it for a year, 18 months max. Right. After that time, normally you'd want to look at getting somebody onto a proper franchise agreement, because there's no way that the pilot agreement protects the business well enough.
Yeah. And I think you put in there clauses that if the franchisee or the pilot franchisee is doing well, they have the option to roll into a full franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. But then in terms of fee structures, when I see pilots, you can't negotiate, can you, to get the full terms that you would? So you can't negotiate to get the full initial fee. Sometimes you're not charging any fees at all, and and therefore there's a limit to how long you can let somebody trade as a pilot.
Yeah, and that's another good point actually, because we've touched about one of the other topics that we did around costs. And as the franchisor, you need to think of that as a cost, because you might be over supporting that either financially, time, it's time away from your current business, or you literally might be foregoing fees and giving them that support. So there is a cost element to that. The other thing you mentioned in there was the manuals. And it's interesting, because a lot of people think that they have their ops manual set up and ready to go from being their corporate unit because of the fact that they run one already, but they've run it from a business ownership point of view, not an interaction between two businesses. So yes, I know how to make that cake or unblock that drain or do whatever it is, and you've got all the operational elements in there for that, but you haven't ever had to write down, how do I interact between a franchisor for paying my fees, for having issues, for feeding back ideas into the system, for all the things that will happen between two businesses that you haven't had to have before. And that's a whole new layer that they suddenly have to think of.
And that gives rise to a wider question, I suppose, about how do you make sure that the pilot is comparable and that you're judging it correctly? Because like you say, you are going to over support your pilot. That might mean that their trading looks quite good or their overheads look quite low. I don't know. How do you make sure that when you're looking at that pilot's trading, you can say, that's what a third party proper franchisee should be obtaining?
Yeah, so you need to, as the franchisor, understand that and be able to tell people of what support that you have given. But hopefully the support that you have given has been to improve it for all. So if you're spending quite a lot of time in there, it's not necessarily supporting them directly. It's more looking at all the system and process and how it works and how could we improve it for everybody. So yes, that pilot has got the benefit from it straight away, but every franchisee that follows will have the benefit from the decisions that have been made there. Okay. From the P&L point of view, as I mentioned before, we have to look closely at the P&Ls and is it viable for franchisor or franchisee. So having the pilot P&L, you would need to interrogate that to make sure that all the cost lines are actually in there that a future franchisee is going to have. But also you need to build in there, the fees that that have not been charged, because you need to create something that's going to be a true P&L for going forward. Okay.
Now, I know the British Franchise Association will say if you're thinking of launching a franchise, you must always run a pilot first. And in fact, for BFA memberships, you wouldn't be considered if you weren't operating a pilot first of all. But how does what view do other third parties like lenders take on the need for a pilot?
Yeah, so they, like anyone, franchisee coming in, but all the third parties such as banks in particular, they like to have seen that it has been operated as a franchise. And some of that, we did an Altco business, we did a franchise in Blackpool when they're based in Newquay. And the big thing around that was, can we support at distance? We on purpose put them in two disparate geographical areas to make sure that we could support every franchisee from a hub that was in a different part of the country. So once we've done that, they've got true costs in their P&L. In their P&L, we'd then be showing that with the likes of the banks to say, okay, here's all about our franchise, this is the franchise agreement, this is what we're doing and how we're supporting, these are the fees, and this is what the P&L looks like. Now, if you're going with a theoretical P&L, that's a bit different to if you're going with a pilot P&L to say, this is exactly how somebody performed. And the reason that we do that is so then the the bank can say, okay, we feel comfortable to lend to your potential franchisees coming in. And then as the franchisor, when you're meeting and interviewing franchisees and hopefully approving some, you can say, okay, now go to the banks that we've already had discussions with. They know our business, they understand it, they know the key terms, they know what the P&L looks like. They're comfortable to lend from a brand point of view. Now they just need to get comfortable lending from your personal circumstances point of view. So it absolutely helps by having that proven model again, because hopefully it allows the franchisee to get funding a lot easier if they need it.
And so I suppose what you're saying is if you don't get a really arm's length pilot under your belt with financials that have been, like you said, properly interrogated, then it's going to be difficult for you to raise capital, and then presumably it's difficult for franchisees coming in to raise capital.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a no-brainer thing to do.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, there's always there's always the one-off. So there'll always be someone who comes along, just loves your brand, and might have the cash to go and invest, and that could be a very willing pilot that then becomes a future franchisee of multiple locations. Great, but you're not always going to get that. And you might have the best franchise in the world, but if you're not telling people about it and you're not able to demonstrate that to potential investors / franchisees, then it's pointless having a best kept secret.
So just one final question. Would you say then that in terms of planning your franchisee recruitment and budgeting for that, you should be doing that after you run the pilot and not before you've run the pilot?
Say that again, sorry.
So would it be a good idea when you're thinking about running your franchisee recruitment program?
Yep.
Would it be best not to be getting too much into detail in terms of creating marketing collateral around that and franchise prospectuses until you've run the pilot? Should you do it before the pilot?
Absolutely, yeah. So you might be wasting a lot of time and effort. But there'll be key things in there that you're obviously going to have. But absolutely, the decisions get made further down the line once you're fully into into discovering and understanding what's in it for franchise or franchisee, but particularly franchisee. I think the other key thing there as well is that you might assume there are some certain things that a franchisee will really want from your business and your brand, where actually when you see someone in life as a pilot, it might be subtle differences that actually the real reason why they were interested or where they like it or what makes it a really good franchise from their point of view. So you can build that into how you sell, in inverted commas, your potential franchise into the market.
Thank you, that's good advice.
Thanks.